right, we are still in chapter 31. It's a long chapter, so we left off on verse 24. And so we have Jacob fleeing from his uncle Laban, gathering up his family. He timed it so that Laban was not around when he gathered everything up. When Laban discovered it, of course, he proceeds to chase Jacob down. God, however, as we left off in the last verse 24, came to Laban in a dream and warned him not to pass judgment on Jacob. When he says, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. In other words, it was God's will that Jacob finally depart now. And Laban was neither to condemn Jacob or to try to get him back by flattering him. All right. Verse 25. And Laban overtook Jacob. So he caught up to him, which is easy to do because, as you will recall, Jacob had a great many possessions by now. He had flocks, a lot of servants, large family. They don't travel quickly. It's very easy for Laban to catch up. He didn't have to bring his flocks with him. Laban overtook Jacob, and now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country. And Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead, so nearby. And Laban said to Jacob, what have you done, that you have tricked me, and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? So he immediately broke God's commandment, of course. He accuses Jacob of trickery, of being deceitful, and of kidnapping his daughters, the daughters that were Jacob's wives. Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre? And, of course, we know full well that Laban had no intention of letting Jacob go. And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either bad or good or bad. And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Again, the reference before to these household gods. And as I noted before, we're not sure what those are. Whether they're a remnant of some sort of pagan idolatry or more likely superstitions that they carried along with them. Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, he did this. He went away secretly because he was afraid. I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of your kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he did not find them there. I find this part interesting. He only went to the women's tents, not to any of the men's tents. And that's probably a hint as to, what these, quote, household gods were related to. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but he did not find them. And she said to her father, let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the household gods. The way of women meaning she says, I can't get off of the camel because I'm having my period, basically. So, he couldn't find them. Rachel obviously had them, but as far as Jacob knows, this was a false accusation. And Jacob certainly would not have taken anything that was Laban's. We see how Jacob's behavior was all the time that he was staying with Laban. Jacob kept his agreements at all times. And everything he gained by agreement with Laban. Even when Laban changed the agreement, Jacob still only gained according to whatever agreement Laban had with him. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban, and he said to him, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years, in other words, Jacob has borne all of the burdens of all of the losses even of his flocks, when he perhaps could have, according to their agreements, demanded that Laban replace his losses. These 20 years, so there I was by day, the heat consumed me, the cold by night. He was the one who was out there doing the work, out in the fields, with the pastures. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and he rebuked you last night." And so Laban, even after hearing God's admonition, still wants to pretend to be the party who is wronged, when he spent the last 20 years manipulating everything to his own favor that he possibly could, and still failed to do so. He was, as far as accusing Jacob of trickery, Jacob had every right to leave, and he had every right to fear that Laban would prevent him from leaving. But we know full well it was Laban who was guilty of deceit all along. Of course, beginning with deceiving Jacob by giving him Leah instead of Rachel. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and me, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set up a pillar, and Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." So this is, again, that common practice that they would make a monument as a memorial for an agreement that was made, so that there would be a physical location or place that stands as witness to the agreement that they had made. So they all participate in building it, and this way they couldn't pretend that there was no agreement. All right. They took the stones and they made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. And Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, which is a witness heap, a heap of witness. But Jacob called it Galeed, which is the Hebrew form of exactly the same phrase. Because remember, Laban was Aramaic. He was an Aramean in the land of Assyria, and Jacob was still, Hebrew was his primary language. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." Therefore he named it Galeed and Mitzpah. Mitzpah is watchpost. For he said, "The Lord watch between you and me, and when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." Then Laban said to Jacob, "See the heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me? This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, The word fear there is a reference to God. Fear the Lord your God. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. And so the eating together in front of the heap, that is a witness of the oath that they had made, and the eating together of it, all together forms the testimony of this covenant agreement that Laban had made with Jacob. And we see that the meaning of the agreement, they will part peacefully. Jacob is not going to do his daughters any harm. The reference to taking wives other than my daughters would be taking wives that would then become your main wives, and then leaving my daughters destitute, or leaving them with less. A lot of what we see in Laban here sounds like posturing. When he says at the beginning that the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these daughters or for their children whom they have borne? He's not claiming ownership. He's saying, I have responsibility for them too. I want all of these things to be cared for because you're my son-in-law. These are my daughters. These are all my grandchildren. All right. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. And thus far, Laban's story. I don't think we hear of him again after this. All right. Laban's real issue Jacob's real issue is not so much with Laban in the end. I mean, he could settle with Laban. He could handle Laban. He didn't run away from Laban because he was afraid for his life. But, remember, he did run away from Esau because he was afraid for his life. So Jacob went on his way, chapter 32. And the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which means two camps. The aim suffix on a Hebrew word is it's an interesting suffix because it means that the thing is twofold. It's not quite plural, the same as a plural, but it means there's only two of something. We don't have a suffix like that in English, but Hebrew does. Okay. Once again, you notice how angels of God appear, and Jacob instantly recognizes who they are. And as we'll see in the exchange with them, one of the angels is the angel of the Lord, based upon how Jacob converses with him, because he refers to him as God. He addresses him as God. But I always find it interesting that whenever God appears, either alone or with angels, it's always we know that it's always the pre-incarnate Christ. It is God's Son, who is the one who bears his image before men and speaks his word before men. But they always know. And Jacob and Abraham and Isaac, they all recognize this is God. And so he calls it this is God's camp. So as they're coming on their way, he calls it a camp, which means that they must, that they were camping out there. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus shall you say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you. And there are 400 men with him." Well, that doesn't sound like good news. He sends messengers to say, I'm coming with my family and my possessions. Please don't kill me. And Esau responds with an army. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and camels, into 2 camps. It's wise, thinking if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, then the camp that's left will escape. He's only got 400 men. Jacob's got a lot more than that. So he divides everything in half so that one half will survive. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love, the word mercy again, chesed, and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers, with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So, notice the way in which Jacob is praying. You have given me the promise that my offspring would be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. But I'm afraid of Esau. Keep your promise. He's already beginning the kind of prayer that we call, that's all actually named after this event that next happens, as Jacob is wrestling with God. That he's struggling with God in prayer already before he struggles with him in person. So Jacob stayed there that night. And from what he had taken with him, he took a present for his brother Esau. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. And he handed these over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to the servants, pass on ahead of me. Put a space between drove and drove. In other words, the idea being that all these presents for Esau would come in waves, one after another after another. When Esau, my brother, meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover, he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and the third, and all who follow the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterwards I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. So he pretty much did anything he possibly could think of to make peace with Esau. First of all, he protected his people the best as he could by splitting them up, and then he sent presents and figured out, well, I'm going to send him in the most impressive way I can so that he will be overwhelmed by the gift that I give him. Remember, as he said, he left with nothing but his staff, and now he's coming with great possessions. The same night, Jacob arose, and he took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children. So this is all we're left now. So he separated the 2 camps, but he kept his family together there with him. He sent them, and he crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And he took them and sent them across the stream, and everything else that he had with him. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So once again, we see God blesses. Jacob knew that this was God. And yet Jacob is wrestling with God. It's quite obvious that God can win whenever he wishes to. And this is a very good picture of the way in which God deals with us. That God appears to struggle with us. and sometimes even appears to be our enemy, the one that we have to convince, and yet all the time God wants to bless us. But this is faith. Faith to believe the promise that God had given. God had given Jacob the promise that your descendants will be as the sand of the sea. And Jacob is wrestling with God, holding him to his promise, believing that even though it is God himself I am wrestling with now, God will do what he said. Jacob wrestling with the angel of the Lord is somewhat similar to what happened when God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, his son. Similar thing going on. All right, so then the angel said, "Let me go, for the day is broken. I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel." So here is where the name of the nation of Israel comes from. Israel means strive with God. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face." So that's what Peniel means. It means the face of God. Saying, "I have seen God face to face, and my life has been delivered." All right. What is your name? Why is it that you ask my name? God does reveal his name in his time. We see how he later reveals it directly to Moses. But what's interesting here, people point out that, yes, but, when God calls himself I am, yet we already see that God is known by this name, Yahweh, already throughout Genesis up to this point. We hear him being called the Lord repeatedly up to this point, just in the previous chapter a few times. Or verse 9 of this chapter. "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me." So what does he mean by "tell me your name"? Well, there's an understanding here that the Lord and the angel of the Lord are not the same person. This is something you see that the Jews were very confused by, particularly if you read the intertestamental literature, the Second Temple literature of the Jews. They recognize these things in the Old Testament, that you have the Lord and the angel of the Lord, or sometimes you have the Lord and the word of the Lord, or sometimes you have the Lord and the name of the Lord, distinguished as different persons in the text. And so they're confessing the Lord as one, but there's this second Yahweh that they don't understand. How is that? How does this all work out? They did not know. But Jacob recognizes the same thing here, you see. For he knows the name of the Lord as Yahweh, and yet he asks the angel of the Lord, "What is your name?" Well, that name would not be revealed for quite some time, because in the end, the name of the angel of the Lord is Jesus Christ, the one who saves his people from their sins. All right. The sun rose upon Jacob as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. Okay? All right. Stop there. This doesn't met Esau.
I thought that story was way more ahead when he met Esau, and then he was fleeing Egypt.
No, Jacob never fled to Egypt until after he had already returned. After Isaac had already died and so forth.